Hey, well, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into my latest video. It hasn't been that long since you guys have seen me, but for me, it feels like it's been an eternity since I have made it a video. Just getting in the habit of creating these type of videos on Tuesdays and Wednesdays for you guys throughout the NFL season has been awesome, but obviously, with it being week 18, most fantasy football championships have concluded, even though we have unfortunately had the incident with Damar Hamlin, which I want to say a big shout out to Damar Hamlin. If those are unaware, he has, I won't say, I'll say survived. He definitely has survived. He has gotten out. He's out of the breathing tube. For those that don't know, he's talked to his teammates. He's with his family. So everything is looking promising on that end, which is amazing. It's God's blessing that all of our prayers and thoughts that were thrown towards him and his family have pulled through. But with that being said, there might be some either fantasy championships that are still on the line. I do know there are leagues that have just decided how they are going to distribute the funds for the last week's fantasy championships. But I also understand there are some leagues that are like, hey, let's just push it to week 18 and determine the championship then. I also understand there are some very few leagues that this is how they have set up their seasons, where the fantasy championships are going to be determined this weekend. Then, of course, with it being daily fantasy football between FanDuel, DraftKings, Underdog Fantasy, and a number of platforms where you can play daily fantasy lineups, that people are looking to play lineups this weekend. So that's why I am doing this video, my top starts and sits. But with that being said, this is not your typical starts and sits for me. I am going to be giving out my top streaming options, how I have been doing throughout the season when I did my waiver wire video. With that being said, though, let's go ahead and dive into my top starts and sits. As it has been throughout the season, I'm gonna give you guys my top two starts and sits for the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. So let's go ahead and dive into the most important position in football, which is quarterback. And my top start of the week, I'm going with the man himself, A-Rod, Aaron Rodgers against the Lions. The Lions have been giving up 22.5 points per game to quarterbacks this year. That is the most allowed. And then this is the last game of the NFL season. So for me, if I'm putting together a daily fantasy football lineup, or if I'm playing this weekend, I'm definitely looking to play one of the best quarterbacks I've ever played the game. And then now I will be honest, like, he had a great matchup last time. In the last matchup, he had 291 yards, which is great. He basically almost crossed the 300 mark. But he only had one touchdown and three interceptions. I do want to be honest with you guys on some of my starts as far as how it went the last time that these teams have faced. Because that's one of the benefits of the last week in the NFL season, is that these are all divisional matchups. So we got to see what some of these players have done in prior matchups. But in my personal opinion, I don't think prior matchups determine the outcome of how they're going to perform on Sunday. With that being said, this is a win to get into to the playoffs for the Green Bay Packers. I'm throwing all my chips in on Aaron Rodgers, so he's going to be my MVP play when I play that matchup on my FanDuel lineup this week. So yeah, Aaron Rodgers is my top start of week 18. My next top start, I'm gonna go with Trevor Lawrence against the Titans. Now this matchup is tomorrow night, which I'm recording this on a Friday evening. So yeah, this is tomorrow night. That matchup between the Titans and the Jaguars determines who will make the playoffs and who will win the AFC South. So I expect Trevor Lawrence to come out and ball out like he did against the Titans last time. The last time when the Jaguars and the Titans played a game, Trevor had 368 passing yards and three total touchdowns. Now, when you look at it in terms of the fantasy matchup, the Titans are giving up 19.6 points per game, which is the fourth most across the NFL. So you got a great matchup on paper. He showed last time that he had completely balled out against them. So yeah, Trevor Lawrence is another easy start for me in the final week of this NFL season. Now, moving into my sits, my top sit of the week, I'm going with Kenny Pickett against the Browns. Now, I will be honest with everyone. Now, if this was like last week or any prior weeks, I don't know if I would ever feel comfortable listing Kenny Pickett as a sit. Not because like he's been a great fantasy asset throughout the season, but how many quarterbacks are not even going to play this weekend between the injuries and then between certain teams sitting certain starters for this week as they try to get prepared for the playoffs and wild card weekend next week. But with that being said, like I mentioned, there are quarterbacks that are hurt. So Kenny Pickett might look like a decent option. He got that game winning drive last weekend. And so people might be thinking, like, you know what? Kenny's been looking good over these past few weeks. But I would look to avoid him in my daily lineups this week. Against the Browns have only given up 13.1 points per game to quarterbacks this year. That is the second fewest across the NFL. So even though I can potentially see the Steelers winning this game, based on what we have seen on paper, I would look to avoid Kenny Pickett in my lineups this weekend. My other sit, which would be, I would say, this is a temper my expectation play. If you are playing in a regular or a dynasty league that is determining their fantasy championship this weekend, but if you're putting together a daily lineup, I would look to avoid Justin Herbert this week. The Broncos have only allowed 13.2 points per game to quarterbacks this year. That is tied for the third fewest allowed. Now, the Chargers have said they are going to play their starters to compete for the fifth seed in the AFC, but don't get that twisted. At some point in this game, if it like, maybe I definitely should have looked up like how the seedings would play out for the Chargers, but there's always a possibility, like in this game, for example, where the Chargers will look up to the scoreboard and be like, you know what, we're pretty much locked into our seed. The other team is winning. They could potentially pull their starters in this game. So with that being said, I would not only look to avoid Justin Herbert for that reason, but like I mentioned, when you look at it on paper, the Broncos have been very good against quarterbacks in fantasy football this season. So with that being said, my top starts of the week at quarterback: Aaron Rodgers against the Lions, Trevor Lawrence against the Titans, and my sits: Kenny Pickett against the Browns and Justin Herbert against the Broncos. Moving into my running back position, my top start of the week, which is kind of crazy that you would never think that this guy would be a top start because earlier in the season he was with the Bills and eventually he got traded in the Hines trade between the Buffalo Bills and the Colts. And then when when Jonathan Taylor got injured, he has actually taken over as the starting running back for the Indianapolis Colts, which is actually setting up for him to have a potentially big outcome and the highest ceiling, not only in fantasy, but for his career for Zach Moss against the Texans. The Texans have been one of the worst rushing defenses in the NFL this year. As far as fantasy, they're giving up 26.4 points per game to running backs. That's the most allowed. Moss has been dominating the touches out of the backfield for the Colts over the past few weeks. And then I know it's a long time ago, but back in week one when these two teams faced, Jonathan Taylor, I didn't put it in my notes, but I know for a fact that he went over 150 rushing yards and had like at least a one touchdown or two in that matchup. So I think I could see Zach Moss not only going over 100 rushing yards in this game, but also getting a touchdown in the process as well. Now, my other start is going to be Dalvin Cook against the Bears. The Bears have allowed the 23.5 points per game to running backs this year. That is the second most allowed in the NFL. Now, when you look at the last time the Bears and Vikings faced against each other, Dalvin Cook had 121 yards and 2 touchdowns in that matchup. Now, I do have my concern where if the Vikings don't see a potential to jump to the number 2 seed in the playoffs, I can see the Vikings pulling their starters at some point in this matchup, especially because, spoiler alert, when I talk about streaming defenses, I could see their team. I could see the Vikings going up big on the Bears pretty early in this matchup. So I will be honest, I have my concern with that with Cook in this week. So maybe Alexander Madison might be a sneaky play in DFS. because they might want to keep Cook happy. I'm sorry, keep Cook healthy for the wild card matchup next week. But with that being said, they still have an opportunity to get to the number 2 seed. So I can definitely see Cook at least getting to 75 yards and a touchdown before they would pull the starters. And if they don't pull the starters, I can definitely see him going over the 100-yard mark again and getting you at least 1 or 2 touchdowns. My sit of the week, I'm going with James Conner against the 49ers. It's pretty simple. I know Jared Stidham and them kind of like surprised us all last week against the 49ers defense, but I think they're going to get back on track right before they get into the playoffs. And with that being said, the 49ers have only allowed 11.2 points per game to running backs this year. That is the fewest amount in the NFL. Plus, you got the Cardinals who are playing David Blau at quarterback, while David Blau has been a nice play, not in fantasy, but like a nice like spot starter, if you will, at times throughout his career. But with that being said, the 49ers defense is not going to be scared of David Blau. They're gonna stack the box against James Conner. So with James Conner, if you put him in either your regular lineup or a daily lineup, I think you're going to be betting on a touchdown for him to pull through for you. So I would look to avoid him in your lineups this week. My other sit, I am going to go with Devin Singletary and James Cook against the Patriots, and it's strictly because the Patriots have been relatively tough against the running backs this year in fantasy football. They're only giving up 13.9 points per game to running backs. That is the second fewest amount across the NFL. Now, we also have to keep in mind in this matchup that the Patriots need to win this game, and if they win this game, they potentially have a chance to get into the playoffs. So Bill Belichick is going to do everything that he can do to make sure that his defense can stop the Bills' offense. And while Josh Allen and that passing attack might be the threat, they have always been strong against the run. That's what Bill Belichick is really good for, is stopping a team's run and daring to pass the beat to them. And then they're splitting reps in the process. So with that being said, Singletary and Cook, I would look to leave them out of your lineups this weekend. So with that being said, my top starts at running back is going to be Zach Moss against the Texans, and then Dalvin Cook against the Bears. My sits, I'm going to go with James Conner against the 49ers, and then Devin Singletary and James Cook against the Patriots. Moving into my top starts and sits for the wide receiver position, sticking with everything I said about Trevor Lawrence, I'm just going to go ahead and carry that into this top start at my wide receiver position. I am going to go with Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Marvin Jones against the Titans. I don't want to reiterate everything I've already said about Trevor Lawrence, but with that being said, the Titans are allowing 26.2 points per game to wide receivers. So that's why I think all three are a potentially good play for you this weekend. Now, I think Kirk and Jones are the safest play. Now, when these two teams met earlier this season, Zay Jones had 8 receptions for 77 yards and a touchdown on 12 total targets. Now, Kirk, he had 5 receptions for 45 yards on 7 targets, which you want to see more yards, maybe a touchdown out of Kirk, but I think I could see potentially him and Jones swapping that type of production in this game. Now, I will be honest. Marvin Jones Jr. didn't have the greatest fantasy game last time. He only had 1 reception for 22 yards on 1 target. But Jones Jr. in these daily lineups at times, which I've played him throughout the season, he can be a sneaky play for you, right? So if you are putting together a daily lineup, Jones Jr. is like the cheap play. But if you're willing to spend more money on a Kirk or Jones, I would go that way this weekend. My other top starts, I'm going with Christian Watson and Alan Lazard against the Lions. The Lions are giving up 24.8 points per game to wide receivers this year. That is the 3rd most across the NFL. Now, looking at the prior matchup, when these teams played each other, Lazard had 4 receptions for 87 yards and a touchdown on 10 total targets. But with that being said, Christian Watson, he only had 2 receptions for 24 yards on only 2 targets. But with that being said, this is a completely different Packers team since when the last time that these two teams faced. Now, I would expect Lazard's targets to go down. I would expect Watson's targets to go up prior from that matchup. But regardless, this is a must-win game. It's Aaron Rodgers on Sunday Night Football, the final game of the NFL season. Yeah, so if I'm putting together a daily lineup, I'm gonna look to stack a lineup with Rodgers and one of the guys he's going to throw to. It's going to be your personal choice between Lazard and Watson. I don't think you can go wrong with either. But yeah, I think either are a great play throughout the weekend. Now, moving into my sits, kind of going off what I said about Justin Herbert against the Broncos, I'm going with my top sits at wide receiver: Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Joshua Palmer. Against the Broncos. Now, the Broncos are only giving up 14.2 points per game to wide receivers this season. That is the fewest amount in the NFL. I just listed 3 wide receivers. Can you imagine if all 3 of those wide receivers try to split those 14.2 points? It's not going to be the greatest outcome in your lineup. So, again, with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, if you are playing in a dynasty or a redraft league where you're playing your championship game this weekend, you're probably going to need to play those guys, right? So they're going to be temper your expectation plays. But if you're putting together your daily lineup, I will look to avoid them for all the reasons I just said. But just like I said about Justin Herbert, at some point in this game, if the Chargers understand that if they win the game, it's not even going to improve their seeding in the playoffs, there's an easy scenario where the Chargers will pull their starters at some point in this game. So which makes me think when I put together my daily lineups, I don't want them in there for that reason. So that's why I would look to avoid those 3 players. My other sits, I'm going with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle against the Jets. The Jets have only allowed 15.7 points per game to wide receivers this year. That's the second fewest amount in the NFL. Now, the Dolphins are in a must-win game. They win this game, they're going to be going to the playoffs. But with that being said, Tua's not playing this game. Teddy Bridgewater's not playing this game. It's going to be Skylar Thompson, the undrafted rookie quarterback. Now, I know some people like the potential promise of Skylar Thompson, but when you look at it, at the end of the day, this guy hasn't got much time to play with the starters throughout the season, so he's not going to have that type of chemistry with Waddle and Tyreek Hill. So, just like I talked about in the wide receivers prior, if you're in a redraft and dynasty, you're probably going to play Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Temper your expectations. But if you're putting together a daily lineup, I would look to avoid both of these wide receivers from Miami. So again, my top starts at wide receiver: Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Marvin Jones Jr. against the Titans. And then Christian Watson and Alan Lazard against the Lions. My sits: Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Joshua Palmer against the Broncos, and then Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle against the Jets. Moving into the top starts and sits for my tight end position, my top start, I decided to go with the chalk pick, but it's Tyler Higbee against the Seahawks. The Seahawks have allowed 12 points per game to tight ends this year. That is the most allowed to tight ends. It seems like every time I've ever watched the Seahawks game, it feels like for the most part that tight ends are finding a way to the end zone against them. But I have been pretty much completely honest with my top starts this week, where if the prior matchup, it hasn't gone well for them. The prior matchup did not go well for Higbee. He only had 2 receptions for 14 yards on only 5 targets. But I will say this, there's a caveat. John Wolford started that game. Now they have Baker Mayfield. So with that being said, I can see a better outcome for Tyler Higbee with Baker Mayfield as the starting quarterback this weekend. We also have to keep in mind, this is basically Baker Mayfield's last chance to leave a strong impression across the league that he's at least capable of going to compete for a starting job next year, or at least being the top backup on the quarterback market in free agency. So he does have to impress. And if there's one way that Baker Mayfield can impress, is taking advantage of a weakness in the Seattle defense, which has been covering tight ends. So with that being said, I think Tyler Higbee is a very sneaky good play this week in daily lineups. Now, this is a name, the next one is a name I did debate if I should put him on here, but with this being week 18, not a lot of people are playing daily or redraft lineups. Most people probably will be putting together daily lineups, which makes me think in daily lineups, George Kittle is likely the play. He's going against the Cardinals, who, if you guys have been following me all season long, I've said the Cardinals have been traditionally, over the past few years, one of the absolutely worst defenses against tight ends in fantasy football. As far as this season, they're giving up 10.6 points per game. That's the second most allowed in the NFL, and it's only the Seahawks and the Cardinals who are giving up double-digit point per games to tight ends this year. And then when you look at the last matchup, now Jimmy Garoppolo was the quarterback in that matchup. Let me go ahead and put that caveat in there. But with that being said, the last time that George Kittle faced the Cardinals earlier this season, I think it was at the beginning of November, he had 4 receptions for 84 yards, 2 touchdowns on 6 targets. So I think he's a very strong play in daily lineups this weekend. Moving into the final part, my top sits. Hunter Henry against the Bills. The Bills are giving only up 3.9 points per game to tight ends this year. That is the fewest amount in the NFL. And then if you hear all the reports that are coming out about how the players got to talk to Damar Hamlin this morning, man, that Bills team is going to be so motivated on Sunday. I think they're going to absolutely demolish the Patriots. So yeah, with that being said, I think the Hunter Henry is a name I'm looking to avoid this weekend. And another name I would look to avoid, I'll go ahead and say Dalton Schultz against the Commanders. The Commanders only given up 5.4 points per game to tight ends this year. That's the fourth fewest amount across the NFL. And that's strictly the reason. It's not necessarily their defense or anything. It's just that when you look at it on paper, tight ends just haven't fared well in fantasy football against the Commanders. So Dalton Schultz, when you're putting together that daily lineup, he is a name I'm looking to avoid this weekend. So yeah, that is my top starts and sits for the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. But like I mentioned, guys, this is going to be a different video where I'm going to end it with my top streaming defenses of the weekend. Now, these top streaming defenses, I stuck with what I've done throughout the season, where all these defenses have to have at least 50% roster availability on Yahoo at this moment. Now, of course, if you're playing a daily lineup, there might be some better options out there for you, especially with like second and third string quarterbacks playing throughout the weekend. But why don't I go ahead and run through these defenses just in case you are playing in a redraft or dynasty league and you have been streaming defenses throughout the season like I have been. My top streaming defense of the week, I'm going with the Vikings against the Bears. The Vikings are available in 66% of the leagues, and this is strictly because Justin Fields is not playing this weekend. Guess who's playing? Nathan Peterman. That guy can throw interceptions if it would save his life. So with that being said, I think the Vikings are easily the top streaming defense of this week. My second one, I'm going with the Jaguars against the Titans. The Jaguars are available in 55% of the leagues out there, and that's the same thing. They're going against a backup quarterback who just joined the team 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I know some people thought Dobbs looked better than Malik Willis, maybe, I guess. But at the end of the day, I don't think he didn't. When I watched that game between the Cowboys and Titans, he didn't really impress me. And I mean, there was an opportunity for Trayvon Diggs to have a pick six in that matchup. Obviously, this is a game the Jaguars need to win the division and get into the playoffs. So with that being said, I can see a lot of sacks and potential turnovers in this game for the Jaguars defense. And then the next one, I'm going to go with the Chargers against the Broncos. The Chargers are available in 51% of the leagues right now. And this is strictly because the Broncos offense has been a complete mess this season. I mean, even though Russell has kind of played better over the last few weeks, he still has potential to throw turnovers. That offensive line is really hurt right now. So with Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa back in the lineup, I see the sacks coming. I see the potential turnovers coming. So that's why I have the Chargers on this list. My number 4 streaming defense, I am going to go with the Jets against the Dolphins. The Jets are available in 63% of the leagues right now. This is for 2 reasons. A, the Jets have, even though the Jets season, honestly, I think the Jets season has gone a lot better than what most people expected. I don't know why some people think this has been a letdown, maybe because of how it started for them. But with that being said, the Jets have had a strong defense throughout the year. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with the Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle sit, they're going against a undrafted rookie quarterback, right? So that for that reason, I can see the Jets offense taking advantage of that, getting the sacks and the potential turnovers as well. And then my last streaming defense, I'm going with the Bengals against the Ravens. There were some defenses I thought about, but then it came. Now, really quick, the Bengals are available in 68% of the leagues, but it came out earlier this afternoon that Tyler Huntley might not play this game. So if Tyler Huntley can't play, Lamar's already ruled out, Lamar Jackson. That will leave them to their undrafted rookie in Anthony Brown. Pretty sure I should have wrote that down in my script, but I'm pretty sure it's Anthony Brown, the rookie, undrafted rookie quarterback out of Oregon. But that's what I'm saying. They're basically be playing against a undrafted quarterback, and if they win this game, that basically they've there's a whole scenario with the Hamlin thing. They've already won the division, but if they lose this game, there's a scenario they can go on the road against the Ravens next week in the playoffs. As you can see, Titan has decided to go ahead and start drinking his water at the end of this video. So why don't I just go ahead and wrap this up? My top streaming defenses of the week. Vikings against the Bears, Jaguars against the Titans, Chargers against the Broncos, Jets against the Dolphins, and the Bengals against the Ravens. So yeah, that is my this is going to be my final fantasy video of the season, guys. So if you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please hit the subscribe button because I don't plan on stopping here. You guys might not get necessary fantasy content in the coming months, but I do plan on producing NFL related content over the next few months over the course of the off season, and then once we get to around after the draft, I will start producing fantasy content again as we get closer to the 2023 season. So make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can always keep up with the latest part of my content. Now, if there's any names or defenses that I did not talk about in the video and you want to get my opinion from, get in my comment section. I will get back to you. Shoot me a DM. I will get back to you. Or if you have my number, you can always message me as well. But with that being said, with Titan over there drinking some water, I'm sure I've been having to try to over talk over him. With that he just got done. But with that being said, I do want to just say again, I really thank everybody that has followed me this season, that has subscribed to my channels. I want to continue to get better for you guys. So yeah, reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm going to hop off here. Go win some money this weekend if you have the opportunity. Peace out and enjoy your weekend.